We begin in Kentucky, where no officers were directly charged in the death of Breonna Taylor, who was shot dead by Louisville police more than 6 months ago. Taylor's death received renewed national interest in the wake of protests over the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis this summer. A grand jury is indicting one officer connected to the case. Former officer Brett Hankison is facing 3 charges of wanton endangerment of Taylor's neighbors. According to Kentucky's Attorney General, Hankison's bullets did not strike Taylor, and he said 2 other officers at the scene were justified in their use of force because Taylor's boyfriend fired his gun in response to them breaking down their door. We will have more on those charges in a moment, but first we head to Washington, where there were ceremonies for the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ginsburg's body is lying in repose at the Supreme Court, where she spent 27 years on the bench and where she argued cases on gender equality and women's rights for decades before. She was met by a small army of her law clerks. 6 of her current clerks and 5 former ones served as honorary pallbearers, escorting her into the Great Hall of the court for a private ceremony. All 8 of her fellow justices were present to honor her memory. Here's part of how Chief Justice John Roberts remembered her.
Justice Ginsburg's life was one of the many versions of the American dream. Her father was an immigrant from Odessa. Her mother was born 4 months after her family arrived from Poland. Her mother later worked as a bookkeeper in Brooklyn. Ruth used to ask, "What is the difference between a bookkeeper in Brooklyn and a Supreme Court justice?" Her answer, 1 generation.
After the ceremony, Ginsburg's body was moved outside to the top of the Supreme Court steps for the start of 2 days of public viewing. Then she will be moved to the Capitol, becoming the first woman in U.S. history to lie in state there. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton were among those who paid their respects to the late justice today. It was President Clinton who nominated Ginsburg to the Supreme Court in 1993. This all comes as President Trump and Republicans push forward with replacing Ginsburg on the court, potentially before Election Day. Federal Judge Amy Coney Barrett, one of the top contenders for the president's nomination, visited the White House again on Tuesday. She's considered one of the White House's top picks for the job, along with Judge Barbara Lagoa. Lagoa is a first-generation Cuban American and a favorite of Florida Republicans who think she could help the president win the state. At the White House today, President Trump held an event that could also appeal to some conservative Florida voters, especially the growing population of those who left socialist countries to immigrate to the U.S. He held a ceremony honoring veterans of the Bay of Pigs invasion, the failed attempt by the Kennedy administration and the CIA to use Cuban exiles to invade the country and overthrow the Castro government. President Trump used the event to attack socialism and the Obama administration's attempt to normalize relations with Cuba.
We will honor your courage with my administration's determination to defeat communism and socialism, and we will do that in our own country, too. We're in the process of doing it right now, and it has stepped, in my opinion, beyond the word socialism, and we are meeting it with great force. The Obama-Biden administration made a weak, pathetic, one-sided deal with the Castro dictatorship that betrayed the Cuban people and enriched the communist regime. I canceled the Obama-Biden sellout to the Castro regime.
For his part, Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden has been resistant to the idea that he at all embraces socialism. Here's his response to local media on the topic after a visit to Wisconsin this week.
I beat the socialists. That's how I got elected. That's how I got the nomination. Do I look like a socialist? Look at my career, my whole career. I am not a socialist. Number 3.
The former vice president spoke in the battleground state of North Carolina Wednesday, where he attacked President Trump for saying virtually nobody is being affected by the coronavirus.
You go home and your mom's gone, your dad's gone. He's a virtual nobody? The idea, the way we're talking about people, and this is all within our power to do something. The virus wasn't his fault. But the way he's handled it has been close to criminal.
At his rally in Pittsburgh last night, President Trump made no mention of the U.S. surpassing the milestone of 200,000 coronavirus deaths. But he did claim he saved millions of lives despite the U.S. having the highest death toll in the world. Ed O'Keefe and Anita Kumar join me now. Ed is a CBS News political correspondent, and Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor at Politico. Welcome to you both. Anita, let me start with you. Again last night, the president said a vaccine is coming very, very shortly. But just yesterday, the Washington Post reported the FDA will soon announce tougher approval standards for a COVID-19 vaccine. That makes a timeline of months, not weeks, more likely. What can you tell us about the disconnect between the president and the scientists and medical professionals working for him?
Well, we've seen this disconnect for the last 6 months, really 7 months now, during the coronavirus, where he has differed from these medical experts that are advising him on what the treatments are, when the vaccine's coming out, and really how bad the virus is across the country. And there has been that disconnect the whole time. You're exactly right, though. If these new standards go in place, it will be months at least before we can see anything. And, you know, the reason, I think we have to go back to the reason that they're looking at putting in these new standards. And it is because people are saying in polls, Americans are saying, the majority of them do not trust what the president is saying about the vaccine. They're not sure that they want to take this. More and more people are saying they are afraid to take a vaccine if it comes out until they know more. And so what the medical experts do not want is for a vaccine to be available and then people not take that vaccine, because we still have the coronavirus and there's still that problem. So they're trying to shore up that trust in the American people. And the president keeps saying different things, contradicting that.
Right. And so, Ed, on that point, what impact do President Trump's words have on his own government's ability to safely roll out a vaccine? Because as Anita notes in our CBS News polling shows from the beginning of this month, voters are increasingly skeptical about a potential vaccine.
Yeah, I think the more he says, Elaine, the more skeptical people become, or at least that skepticism sort of calcifies and isn't reduced in any big way. You talk to 5 different people on the street, you're going to get 7 different answers as to what people should be doing right now regarding the coronavirus, whether or not to wear a mask, and when or if there will be a vaccine, and what exactly it will do. It speaks to the sort of different ways we all consume information, the different ways that politics has really just sort of enmeshed itself in everything we do now, from whether or not we wear masks, or whether or not we would accept taking a vaccine this year or next year or at a later date. It is just, the whole system and the whole process of dealing with this pandemic has been politicized and become a partisan, whipping tool against the other side in both cases. And so it's just really tricky at this point for anyone who's trying to figure out, is this thing going away? Is this medicine potentially going to help me? Is this vaccine going to do something? To really figure it out. And it requires a lot of extra time and research for people. So it's incredibly frustrating. But the more he does this, and the more he talks about it, allows the Democrats to talk about it, allows the whole issue to continue to be politicized.
So, Anita, according to the New York Times tracker, new coronavirus cases are either rising or staying high in 31 states. You have this backdrop of President Trump continuing to hold large rallies without requiring masks. You have Congress coming together to pass the stopgap deal to fund the federal government through early December. But you have negotiations on a new coronavirus relief bill deadlocked, appeared to be headed nowhere. Is there any indication, Anita, that that's likely to change anytime soon?
Well, it just keeps going back and forth. There was a time about a week ago where it looked like it might be going somewhere. The president came out and said that he was supportive of it. It looked like people were talking. There was a compromise deal out there, but it really doesn't look like it. And I've heard a lot of people say this week, Congress can definitely get some things done, right? They wanted to pass the bill you mentioned. They're getting together on the Supreme Court nomination that should be coming soon. And so if they wanted to do it, they could do it. But they look like they're very, very far apart still. The Democrats want a bigger bill. The Republicans want what they're calling a skinny bill up on Capitol Hill. The disagreement is, of course, what what to pay for, but it's also how much that bill should be. And it's coming right before the election, and so Republicans really want it to be minimal. Democrats want to show that they're doing something, and they want it to be significant and include money for state and local governments, and that's really one of those big issues. The president does want something to be done, but as the White House told us yesterday, he has not picked up the phone and called the speaker. He is not calling lawmakers. He has the Treasury Secretary and his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, on the Hill trying to get something done, but it does look pretty bleak at this point.
It's just hard, I think, for some people to understand why the political will does not seem to be there when the need so very clearly is. But let's talk about the Supreme Court. Ed, as we mentioned, Judge Amy Coney Barrett visited the White House for the second time this week. And I want to play a clip from an interview that I did with her back in 2016 along with Anne Marie Green. This was in the wake of Justice Antonin Scalia's death. Let's take a listen.
Kennedy is a moderate Republican, and he replaced a moderate Republican, Powell. We're talking about Justice Scalia, the staunchest conservative on the court, and we're talking about him being replaced by someone who could dramatically flip the balance of power on the court. It's not a lateral move. And finally, the reality is we live in a different time. Confirmation hearings have gotten far more contentious. And so I just don't think we live in the same kind of time. So I think in some, the president has the power to nominate and the Senate has the power to act or not, and I don't think either one of them can claim that there's a rule governing one way or the other.
So to be clear, Barrett, for her part, did not claim there should be a rule applied to this like other Republicans did. But Ed, how should we expect comments like this to come back around if she is in fact the nominee?
Well, first of all, I know that we're working on putting that entire interview, or at least the entire answer and the broader context of it, on our website as we speak, because we only discovered this just a little while ago. And so I would encourage people to find that on our website later today and to watch it in full. What she was giving was essentially a very neutral analysis of the time, which was that, look, previous appointments have come around election times where, a conservative is replacing a conservative. In 2016, of course, Scalia died, and Barack Obama was a Democrat, and he wasn't going to appoint somebody like Scalia, and there was a chance for a wholesale shift in the ideological balance of the court, as there is right now, to at least expand the conservative majority. And, she's just saying, look, there's no written rules on what goes on here, despite what Mitch McConnell and others might tell you. And so if a president wants to nominate somebody, the Constitution lets him do that. There's no timetable set on that. And if the Senate wants to hold a vote on it, they can. If they don't want to, that's also fine, because it isn't laid out in the Constitution. I think the point she made then that I think others could be making now is, look, if people have issues with this, holding a confirmation vote, nominating somebody in an election year, Congress is totally within its rights to at least try passing a law that sets a timetable and says you can't do it X days before an election or Y days after, and just see if that holds up in court. All of this otherwise is just sort of political and academic, bloviating, and the reality is, as she said, if you look at the Constitution, presidents can nominate justices, Senate gives their advice and consent, and there's nothing in there about when, who, or how. Right. In terms of the timing, I should make clear. In terms of the timing, there's nothing regarding what they can, exactly what they do. Right.
Right. Precisely. So, Anita, speaking of timing, President Trump says his announcement is coming at 5 p.m. on Saturday. Very specific. He let us all know so we could mark our calendars. Do we know at this point who he could be leaning toward and what he wants to accomplish with this Supreme Court nomination?
Well, all signs have been from the very beginning towards Barrett, and I think they're still there. I have been told since this weekend that she was sort of the top choice. He has said he is looking at 5 different people, 5 different women, I should say, but I understand that several of those women probably will not make it to the White House for an in-person interview, so likely not to be that, that serious. The other judge, a judge from Florida that you mentioned, Barbara Lagoa, seemed very it seemed like he was trying to decide between the two. Just the last day or so, we've heard that perhaps, he's fooled on her. The president's going to be in Florida at the end of the week, Thursday and Friday, and there was some talk yesterday that he would meet her on Friday. And then we heard last night and today that meeting might not happen at all. So if he does, if he has liked what he's seen with Barrett, Judge Barrett, these last couple of days that she's been at the White House, it looks like, she would be the pick. Remember, she was considered before. She was considered last time he was choosing in 2018. She has already been vetted by the counsel's office at the White House. Some of that paperwork and that vetting has already been done, and she's already had an interview with the president. So she has all those things going for her that Judge LaGoya doesn't have, that there's already sort of a head start. The White House and the president are very well aware that there's a tight timetable. So what they don't want to be doing is starting from scratch. And so that's one of the reasons that Judge Barrett is looking more and more promising to them.
Well, Ed, the Senate Judiciary's ranking Democrat, Dianne Feinstein, recently made some comments about the filibuster rule. What did she say, and what could that mean for the upcoming Supreme Court justice battle?
Sure. Look, she, unlike many other Democrats, especially younger, more liberal Democrats, believe that should the White House and the Senate fall under Democratic control next year, there should be serious discussions about eradicating the filibuster for all, once and for all, in terms of nominations and legislation. That would fundamentally reshape the U.S. Senate as we know it. 87-year-old Feinstein, who's been in the Senate since the early 1990s, is about as big an institutionalist as you can find, big an institutionalist that's left, frankly. And she is a far more moderate, pragmatic, and bipartisan style Democrat than many in her party today, especially many who live in her own state of California. So she always runs counter to these arguments that are being pushed by more vocal, liberal, younger elements of the party, really pushing for a fight. There is some reporting today that once again, as there was 2 and 3 years ago, there's concern about having her be the top Democrat on the committee. But look, seniority puts her there, and she is the top Democrat, at least for now. And, it's just a reminder that in the Democratic Party, there are a lot of different people, a lot of different opinions, and that many of its older, longer, more established members, especially in the Senate, do not necessarily reflect the real will of a lot of more partisan liberal Democrats and their changing views, especially over the course of the last 4 years.
Meantime, we are less than a week away from the first presidential debate of the 2020 election. Joe Biden was asked about his preparation on his way to North Carolina today. Here's his response.
Have you started doing mock debates since last week, Mr. Vice President?
I've started to prepare, but I haven't gotten into it really heavily. I will beginning tomorrow.
All right, so Anita, what do we know about how the president is preparing?
Well, the president's been preparing for a few weeks now, but he's not doing the traditional mock debate that you might expect, where he's standing up on a stage and there's someone playing Vice President Biden. He says he doesn't really need to do that, but he is preparing for it. You have some folks in the White House that are a little concerned about what this is going to be like. Mostly because the president has been talking a lot about how Joe Biden is not a good candidate, that he's not mentally all there. He says this, every day, pretty much at every one of his rallies. So there are a lot of people that are saying, look, he's basically said, the president has basically said Joe Biden isn't a good candidate. If he does anything that looks good on Tuesday night, then the president's going to look like he lost this debate. So you have some people really worried about that. I've noticed in the last few weeks that, the Trump campaign and the White House are really playing up Joe Biden. They're saying, no, we know he's a good debater. He's been doing this. He's been in public office for decades now. We know he would be a strong debater. So you once again have this disconnect between what the Trump campaign is saying and what the president is saying. And they're afraid, that the optics won't be there, that the president's going to show up. Joe Biden might have a good line or two, and he'll be declared the winner. So there's some fear of that in the president's camp.
All right, Ed O'Keefe and Anita Kumar, great to see you both. Just 41 days left until the election. Thank you.